right, let's get right into it. We're going to break down a pretty wild situation at the heart of India's food system. It's a country with warehouses literally overflowing with grain that's also spending billions to import basic food staples. It's a story of having way too much and somehow not nearly enough, all at the same time. So just look at this contrast. It's kind of mind-boggling, right? On one side, you've got these government warehouses just packed to the rafters with rice. I mean, a massive, massive surplus. But then, on the other side, the country is shelling out huge amounts of cash to bring in things that are in pretty much every single Indian kitchen, like cooking oil and dal, a surplus and a deficit, sitting right next to each other. So that's the big puzzle, isn't it? How on earth does a system get so lopsided? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into in this explainer. We're going to look at why it's happening, what it's costing, and, what can actually be done about it. First up, we really need to get our heads around the source of the problem, which is this giant glut of rice. Why is so much of it being grown in the first place? This quote right here, it really gets to the core of it. For farmers, growing paddy, that's rice, it's just the safest financial move they can make. The government guarantees something called a minimum support price, or MSP, and then it buys the crop. It's a sure thing. And in farming, which is full of uncertainty, you can't really blame them for picking the most reliable option on the table. And the result of all those safe bets? Well, it's this number. 356.1 lakh tons. That's how much rice was just sitting in the central pool as of October 2024. It's a truly massive figure, but what does it actually mean in practice? It means this. The country is holding on to more than 3 times the amount of rice it needs for its food security programs and its strategic reserves. Let that sink in. 3 times. This isn't just a little bit of extra food. It's a huge structural imbalance on an epic scale. And this really shows you how the problem just keeps feeding itself year after year. What we're seeing is that the amount of rice the government buys from farmers, that's procurement, is consistently way more than the amount it gives out through its subsidized food program, the PDS. And that gap between what comes in and what goes out, well, that's the surplus that just keeps piling up higher and higher. Now, you might be thinking, what's the big deal with having a bit of extra rice? Well, this massive surplus doesn't exist in a vacuum. It comes with some very real and very, very high costs. Let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this paradox. Okay, let's start with this number. In a single year, 2023 to 24, India spent 1.2 lakh crore rupees. That's about 14 billion US dollars just on importing edible oils. That is a gigantic outflow of money for a basic, everyday necessity. And it's not just oil. In that very same year, another 30,000 crore rupees, that's roughly $3.6 billion, was spent to import pulses, dals. When you add it all up, you're looking at a massive import bill for food that, theoretically, could be grown right here at home. And this really puts the whole edible oil situation into sharp focus. Over half, 55%, of the country's entire demand is met by bringing it in from other countries. This kind of heavy reliance makes the country really vulnerable to what's happening in the global market. Things like price hikes or supply chain problems like we saw with the war in Ukraine. And here's the last piece of the financial puzzle. This is the annual cost of the government's food subsidy program, around 2 lakh crore rupees, or $24 billion. Just think about it. Having to manage and store that enormous mountain of rice puts a huge strain on this budget, money that could definitely be used for other things. So how do we even get here? Well, this problem didn't just pop up overnight. A key policy decision way back in the 1990s opened the doors to cheaper edible oil imports. And that had a long-term chilling effect on our own domestic production, a situation that, frankly, hasn't ever been fully fixed. Okay, so we've laid out the problem. We've got a system that's totally skewed towards rice, and it's leading to huge costs and a dangerous reliance on imports. So, what's the way out of this mess? Well, the answer seems to be all about rebalancing the scales. The key idea everyone's talking about is crop diversification. In simple terms, it just means encouraging farmers to move away from growing only rice, which uses a ton of water, and instead cultivating a mix of crops that the country actually needs, like those very same oil seeds and pulses that we're currently importing. But here's the big roadblock. You can't just walk up to a farmer and say, hey, stop growing the one crop that guarantees you an income. They're hesitant because switching to something new comes with massive risks. Will the new crop even grow well in their soil? Will they find someone to buy it? And will they get a good price? That guaranteed paycheck from rice is a very, very hard thing to walk away from. So, how do you convince them to take that leap? You have to de-risk the whole process. It takes a bunch of steps. First, you need to figure out what other crops will work best in specific areas. Then, you need to offer financial support to help farmers through that transition period. And crucially, you have to connect them directly to buyers so they know there's a market waiting. It's really about building a whole new, reliable system they can trust. A huge systemic change like this can't just be ordered from the top down. It really has to be built from the ground up by empowering the farmers themselves to lead the change. A huge player in this transition could be something called FPOs, or Farmer Producer Organizations. You can think of them like co-ops. They basically give small farmers the collective power of a large organization, which helps them get better access to markets and have more bargaining power. And these FPOs do all the essential groundwork. For instance, an FPO can get a group of farmers who are growing pulses connected directly with a big company that makes papad. They're the ones who do the market research, build the supply chains, and educate the farmers on best practices, creating a direct link that benefits everybody involved. But it's not just about FPOs. This has to be a real team effort. Empowering other grassroots organizations like self-help groups and other cooperative societies is just as important if we're going to build a more resilient and diversified farming future. Look, let's be totally honest here. None of this is easy. Reforming the entire procurement system is an incredibly complex job. It's going to require a lot of collective debate, and maybe most importantly, it's going to require building trust with farmers. And that is a slow, gradual process that happens over time, not overnight. And that really brings us to our final question. Fixing this paradox isn't just about tweaking a few policies here and there. It's about fundamentally rethinking the foundation of food security itself. It is a monumental task, for sure. But the real question is, can the country collectively come together to build a system that's not only productive, but also truly sustainable and balanced for the long haul?